My name is Pamela Connor, and I was 34 years old the night my stepfather slammed his fist on my mother's mahogany dining table so hard the wine glasses jumped and one of them cracked clean in half. "You'll sign every property over to your sister tonight," Nicholas Whitfield said, his voice low and shaking with a rage I'd learned to fear since I was 19. "Or you sleep on the street. I want you to understand something before I go any further. That table wasn't just furniture. My late father, James Connor, built it with his own hands in 1998, the same year he and my mother, Linda, closed on the modest brick duplex in East Cleveland that would, 26 years later, be worth $412,000 because the whole neighborhood got gentrified around it. That duplex and the small rental property 2 blocks over on Kinsman were the only things my father left behind when the cancer took him. He left them to me, not to my mother, not to my stepsister, to me, in a will notarized 11 days before he died, because he said, and I quote, "Pamela, baby, you're the one who's gonna need something solid under your feet." Before we continue, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Now let's continue. I didn't understand what he meant back then. I understood it fully that night, standing in my mother's dining room in my work scrubs, still smelling like the antiseptic from Cleveland Metro Hospital, where I'd just finished a 12-hour shift as a labor and delivery nurse. My stepsister, Tanya Whitfield, sat at the head of the table like she already owned it. She had her father's cold, flat eyes and my mother's borrowed smile, the one Mama used to give me before Nicholas came into our lives and rearranged her spine into something that bent whichever way he pointed. "Pamela," my mother said softly, not looking at me, "just hear him out." That was the moment I felt the floor tilt under me, not because of what Nicholas said, because of what my mother didn't say. I'd been reasonable for 15 years. I paid the property taxes on both buildings every single year out of my own paycheck because Nicholas said the family fund was tight. I let Tanya move into the Kinsman rental rent-free for 3 years after her divorce because my mother cried and asked me to. I drove 90 minutes round trip every Sunday to bring my mother groceries because Nicholas said he wasn't a delivery boy. I had given and given and given. But nobody, not one person in that room, was prepared for what I would do next. To understand how we got to that dining room, you have to go back to 2009, the year Nicholas Whitfield walked into my mother's flower shop on Kinsman Road, wearing a suit that fit too well for a man who claimed to be between opportunities. I was 17. I remember him leaning on the counter, complimenting my mother's arrangements, telling her she had an artist's hands wasted in a shop this small. My mother had been widowed 2 years by then. My father, James, died of pancreatic cancer in 2007, and grief had made her lonely in a way that made her vulnerable to a man who knew exactly what to say. Within 8 months, Nicholas had moved into our house. Within a year, they were married at the courthouse. No big ceremony, which should have told me something. Within 2 years, Nicholas had convinced my mother to take out a second mortgage on the flower shop to fund what he called an investment opportunity, a used car lot on the east side that folded within 18 months and swallowed $60,000 of my mother's savings whole. I watched my mother, a woman who used to hum Aretha Franklin while she arranged carnations, shrink into someone who flinched when Nicholas raised his voice, someone who apologized for things that weren't her fault, someone who stopped calling me baby the way she used to because Nicholas said it was babying a grown woman. Tanya came with the marriage, Nicholas's daughter from a previous relationship, 15 years old when I met her, angry and displaced and, I'll admit, someone I tried to love like a sister. I taught her to drive. I paid for her prom dress the year Nicholas said money was tight. I sat with her at Cleveland Clinic for 6 hours the night she had her appendix out and Nicholas was in a meeting. I tell you all this not to make myself sound like a saint. I made mistakes too. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I forgave when I should have set a boundary, but I want you to understand that what happened in that dining room didn't come from nowhere. It came from 15 years of a man testing how far he could push a family that wasn't his, and a woman, my own mother, letting him. The breaking point, though, the real one, started 3 weeks before that night, with a phone call from a lawyer named Sheila Grant. Sheila Grant's office was on Euclid Avenue, on the 14th floor of a building with a view of Lake Erie that I barely noticed the day I sat across from her, my father's will spread out on her desk between us. "Miss Connor," she said, "I need to ask you something directly. Has anyone approached you about transferring ownership of either property at 4127 or 4133 Kinsman Road?" My stomach dropped. "Why?" She turned her laptop toward me. It was a title search, one I hadn't ordered. Someone had pulled the deed records on both properties 2 weeks earlier. "Someone's been checking the paperwork," Sheila said, "trying to see what it would take to force a transfer or to challenge the original will." I sat there in that office, hands cold, and I thought about the Sunday before, when Nicholas had asked me, almost casually, over pot roast, whether I'd thought about what happens to those properties when your mother's gone. I thought I'd been paranoid to feel a chill at the question. I wasn't paranoid, I was right. Sheila leaned forward. "Pamela, I've seen this before. It's called elder manipulation. Sometimes it bleeds into what we call intra-family property coercion. Someone is laying groundwork. I don't know who yet, but I'd bet everything in my retirement account it's not your mother." I left that office with a folder full of documents and a feeling in my chest I hadn't felt since the day my father died, the feeling that something precious was being circled by people who had no right to it. 2 days later, my cousin Renee, who still lived on Kinsman and knew everybody's business before they knew it themselves, called me at 11 at night. "Pamela," she said, "you need to sit down. Tanya's been telling people at the beauty shop that she's finally getting what's owed to her. She told Miss Pauline she's about to be a property owner by the end of the month." I hung up the phone and sat in my dark kitchen for a long time, not crying, calculating, because if there is one thing 15 years of watching Nicholas Whitfield operate had taught me, it's that men like him never announce a war. They just quietly move the soldiers into place and wait for you to notice too late. I decided that night I would not be too late. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories go, and I know some of you are already waiting for me to burn the whole family down in Chapter 4. That's not who I am. That's not who my father raised. So I did the reasonable thing first. I called my mother. "Mama," I said, "Renee told me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Is Nicholas trying to get the Kinsman properties signed over to Tanya?" There was a silence on the line, so long I thought the call dropped. Then my mother said, in a voice I barely recognized, small and rehearsed, "Pamela, your stepfather thinks it would bring the family together if things were more balanced." "Tanya doesn't have anything, baby. You have 2 properties. Those properties were left to me by name, in a legal will, by my father," I said, keeping my voice level even though my hands were shaking. "Not to be balanced, not to be redistributed, to me." "Nobody's trying to steal from you," my mother said, and I heard Nicholas's voice in the background, low, telling her what to say next. "We just think, as a family, we should discuss options," I offered, that week, to sit down like adults. I invited my mother to lunch, just the 2 of us, at a diner on Chagrin, hoping to reach her without Nicholas's shadow over the table. She came. She cried into her coffee and told me she was tired, so tired, and that keeping the peace mattered more to her now than anything else. "Mama," I said gently, taking her hand, "keeping the peace with a man who's trying to take my inheritance isn't peace. It's surrender." She didn't have an answer for that. She just squeezed my hand and asked me to please not make a scene at Sunday dinner. I promised her I wouldn't make a scene. I did not know, walking out of that diner, that 11 days later Nicholas would try to make me sign my father's legacy away with his fist on the table, in front of my own mother, like I was a debt he was collecting. But I want you to remember this chapter, because everything that came after, everything, was because I gave them every reasonable chance first. Sunday dinner, my mother's dining room, the one with my father's table, 7:30 in the evening, 3 weeks after the lawyer's office, 11 days after the diner. Nicholas had been drinking. I could smell the bourbon on him from the doorway. Tanya sat there with a manila folder in front of her, and my stomach turned when I saw the seal of a title company on the corner of it. "We've had this conversation long enough," Nicholas said, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. "Pamela, your mother and I have decided it's time to correct an imbalance in this family." "There's no imbalance to correct, Nicholas," I said. "My father left me those properties. That's not up for a family vote." That's when his fist came down on the table. "You'll sign every property over to your sister tonight," he said, spit flying, veins standing out in his neck. "Or you sleep on the street. I built this family up, I held it together while your mother fell apart, and you're gonna sit there and act like you're better than the rest of us because of some piece of paper your daddy left?" The room went silent except for the wine glass rocking on its side, dripping red onto the tablecloth like a wound. I looked at Tanya. She wasn't even pretending to be uncomfortable. She had her phone out, the title transfer documents pulled up, a pen already sitting on top of the folder, waiting. I looked at my mother. "And this is the part I need you to understand, because it's the part that broke something open in me that could never be closed again." My mother looked at me, and then she looked away. She didn't say his name. She didn't say, "Nicholas, stop." She didn't say, "These are Pamela's properties." She picked up her napkin, dabbed at the spilled wine, and said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "Just sign it, Pamela, please, for peace." 15 years of silence had just told me exactly whose side she was on. I stood up slowly. I did not cry. I did not scream. I looked at Nicholas Whitfield, this man who had never once, not once, called me by my name with warmth in his mouth, and I said the words that would end that dinner and begin everything after it. "I'm not signing anything tonight, but you should know, Nicholas, I already know what you did, and so does my lawyer." I left that house without my coat. I sat in my car in the driveway for 40 minutes before I could steady my hands enough to drive, and the next morning, at 7 a.m., I was in Sheila Grant's office before she'd even taken her coat off. "Tell me everything you found," I said. What Sheila had uncovered over the previous 3 weeks was worse than I imagined. Nicholas had gone to a different attorney, a man named Curtis Doyle who ran a small practice out of a strip mall in Garfield Heights, and tried to draft a quitclaim deed, transferring both Kinsman properties from my name into Tanya's, using a power of attorney document. The power of attorney was supposedly signed by my mother, granting Nicholas authority over family estate matters, including my late father's properties, even though those properties were never my mother's to grant power over in the first place. My father's will was airtight. I owned those properties outright, free and clear, no loopholes. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. Sheila had pulled bank records, ones my mother had given her permission to access months earlier during an unrelated estate consultation, and found that Nicholas had been forging my mother's signature on financial documents for over 2 years, small things at first, redirecting portions of her flower shop's remaining pension payout, nearly $40,000 total, into an account Tanya had access to. "Pamela," Sheila said, sliding a folder across the desk, "this isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is financial elder abuse and attempted fraud, and if the quitclaim deed had gone through with a forged or coerced signature, that's a felony." I sat there staring at photocopies of my mother's signature, the real one from her wedding certificate to my father, and the forged one from a bank withdrawal slip, side by side. They weren't even close. Whoever forged it, and Sheila suspected it was Tanya, hadn't even tried very hard, because they were counting on nobody ever checking. "Does my mother know?" I asked. Sheila's face softened. "I think," she said carefully, "your mother knows more than she's letting herself admit." I walked out of that office that day with something I hadn't had in 15 years. Not just anger, evidence. I didn't go to the police first. I know some of you watching this are yelling at your screen right now, telling me I should have, but I needed one more piece before I moved, and I got it from the most unexpected place, Miss Pauline's beauty shop on Kinsman, the same one Tanya had been running her mouth in. Miss Pauline had cut my mother's hair for 20 years. She called me on a Thursday and said, "Baby, you need to come see me. I got something you need to hear with your own ears." I sat in that shop chair, and Miss Pauline played me a voice memo on her phone. Recorded, she told me, because Tanya had been bragging so loud and so often that half the shop had started recording her for their own protection, worried they'd be dragged into a lawsuit as witnesses. Tanya's voice, unmistakable, crackled through the speaker. "My daddy's gonna handle it. Pamela thinks she's slick with her lawyer, but once Mama Linda's power of attorney goes through, it don't even matter what Pamela wants. We already got a buyer lined up for the Kinsman building, some developer paying $310 for it. Daddy's taking 60%, I'm taking 40%, and Pamela can go cry about her daddy's old table somewhere else." I sat in that chair with a cape around my neck and half my hair in rollers, and felt something in me go very, very still. Not rage, something colder and clearer than rage. They hadn't just wanted to redistribute property for family balance. They had a buyer. They had a percentage split already worked out. This was never about fairness. It was a planned theft, dressed up as a family intervention, and my own stepsister had been telling strangers about it in a beauty shop for weeks, while I sat at diners, trying to reason with my mother. Miss Pauline squeezed my shoulder. "I raised 4 girls in this chair, Pamela. I know grief when I see it, and I know greed when I hear it. What you just heard is greed." I asked her to send me that recording. She did, that same afternoon, along with a signed statement from 3 other clients who'd heard Tanya say similar things. I walked out of that shop with my hair only half done and a fire in my chest that no amount of reasonableness was ever going to put out again. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called a family meeting of my own, at a neutral location, a conference room Sheila Grant let me use at her office, and I invited my mother, Nicholas, and Tanya, telling them only that I wanted to discuss the properties like adults, one final time. Nicholas arrived smug, already halfway convinced he'd won. Tanya arrived with that same manila folder. My mother arrived looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, and something in her eyes told me she already suspected this wasn't going to go the way Nicholas expected. I didn't raise my voice. I laid 3 things on the table, one at a time. First, the forged bank documents, side by side with my mother's real signature. Second, a printed transcript of the recording from Miss Pauline's shop, Tanya's own words about the buyer, the 60-40 split, the plan to sell my father's building out from under me. Third, a letter from Sheila Grant, already filed with the Cuyahoga County Recorder's Office, placing a formal fraud alert and legal notice on both Kinsman properties, meaning any attempt to transfer either title without my notarized consent was now criminally actionable and would trigger an immediate police referral. The room went dead silent. Nicholas's face drained of color as he read the transcript. Tanya's hands started shaking so hard the folder slid off her lap. "You've been stealing from your own wife," I said to Nicholas, my voice steady, "and using your daughter to plan the sale of a dead man's property before his widow even knew what was happening." 60-40, Nicholas? You had a number before you had my signature? "Pamela, it wasn't like that," Tanya started, but I held up my hand. "I have a recording of your own voice," I said. "It was exactly like that." Then I turned to my mother And this was the part that broke my heart even as it set me free. Mama, $40,000 of your pension is gone. Forged by your own husband. I have the proof, and I need to know, right now, in front of everybody, whose side you're actually on. My mother sat there for a long time, longer than any silence I'd ever survived in my life, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked open like something that had been sealed shut for 15 years. "Nicholas," she said, not looking at him, "is the account number 4471 real? Is that where my pension went?" Nicholas's jaw tightened. "Linda, don't do this here." "Answer me," my mother said, and for the first time since 2009, I heard the woman who used to hum Aretha Franklin while arranging carnations, the woman who wasn't afraid of anybody. Nicholas didn't answer. His silence was the answer. My mother turned to me, tears streaming, and said words I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Pamela, baby, I am so sorry. I let fear make me small. I let this man convince me that keeping you quiet was keeping the peace, when really I was just keeping myself safe from his temper at your expense. I should have protected what your father left you the second Nicholas said the word balance. I failed you. I want to tell you I forgave her instantly. I didn't, but I reached across that table and I took her hand, because 15 years of fear doesn't undo itself in a single confession, and I understood, finally, that my mother had been a victim in that house too, just a different kind than me. Sheila had already called ahead. 2 detectives from the Cleveland Financial Crimes Unit were waiting outside the conference room, there at my mother's own request, made quietly on a phone call while I was gathering my documents the night before, because unbeknownst to me, my mother had gone to Sheila herself that morning, ready to tell the truth before I even asked her to. Nicholas was arrested that afternoon on charges of forgery and attempted theft by deception. Tanya, facing her own charges as an accomplice, cut a deal that required full restitution and probation, on the condition she testify against her father. My mother filed for divorce 2 weeks later. She moved into the Kinsman duplex, into my father's old home, with my blessing, not as an owner, but as my tenant and my mother, paying not 1 dime in rent, because some debts aren't about money. It's been 8 months since that dining room, since the fist on the table, since the wine glass that cracked and never got replaced because my mother said she wanted to remember what almost broke us. Nicholas took a plea deal. 18 months. Restitution he'll be paying off for the next decade. Tanya moved to Columbus after her probation ended, and I heard through Renee that she's working retail and, for once, staying quiet. I don't wish her ruin. I wish her the kind of hard, humbling growth that maybe, someday, makes her into someone who doesn't measure family by what she can extract from it. My mother, Linda, still hums when she arranges flowers. She opened a small flower stand again, just a folding table on Kinsman on Saturdays, and I go every single week now, not out of obligation, but because I want to. We talk, really talk, about the years she lost herself, about the years I spent being reasonable to my own detriment. We're rebuilding something slower and more honest than what we had before. I kept both properties. My father's table sits in my own dining room now, in the little house I bought 2 streets from my mother's, close enough to matter, far enough to breathe. I had the wine stain professionally treated instead of removed, a small, strange choice, but I wanted a mark on that table that reminded me what it cost to finally stand up. I'm still a labor and delivery nurse. I still work 12-hour shifts bringing new life into the world. But I walk into that hospital every day now, as a woman who knows exactly what she's worth, and exactly what she's willing to fight for. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Being reasonable is not the same as being weak, but there comes a moment when reasonable has done all it can do, and what's left is standing your ground with the truth in your hand. My father built that table so his family would have something solid under their feet. It took me 34 years, one fist on the mahogany, and one cracked wine glass to understand that he wasn't just talking about furniture. He was talking about me. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If it kept you hooked, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and tell me in the comments what you think happened after the ending. I'd love to read your theories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.